Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Matt, and this is Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit, your beacon of freedom and the American way of life. Tune in every Friday for a new episode as we dive into the world of liberty and what makes our country great. Welcome back. And also, we've got our viewers here on YouTube tuned in. So for those of you who are listening in on the podcast, thanks for tuning in. Those of you who are watching on the YouTube channel, thanks for tuning in. So, vice versa. If you don't follow us on YouTube, check us out at Iraq Veteran 8888. That's my YouTube channel. Also, if you're watching on the channel, obviously go check out Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit. Shameless plug.
It's a great podcast, by the way.
Yep, we post every Friday. It's usually about an hour-long episode, and we dive into all kind of different topics and stuff. And we just try to go about it in a fun manner and everything. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. All right, and today we're going to be talking about the Modern Minuteman.
Yeah.
And that concept has been getting more and more important as we see recent events as they've turned out, and things that have happened all over our country. The civil unrest, the looting, the rioting, people's businesses being, burned and attacked and looted, people in many cases being assaulted, sometimes with deadly force, sometimes with deadly consequences.
Yeah.
And it's become more and more important for us as civilians to understand that our society is comprised of Minutemen, and to understand what that concept is, what it means, where it's going, what our responsibilities are to each other and to our country. And we can really kind of go down this rabbit hole and kind of talk about some of these concepts a bit.
Right. And I'll start with saying is that what a Minuteman means to me. And what it means to me is that, and let's forego the actual term Minuteman, because there's plenty of ladies and plenty of women that are just as capable in these situations as a man. So I don't want to exclude that, but for all intents and purposes, the terminology of Minuteman, it just means someone that's always prepared, always ready to take action to protect their family, their friends, their country, their nation. And I think it's a big responsibility to have that. And we just talked about it. I started carrying, with all the civil unrest that's happening, given the socioeconomic, circumstance, I had to start carrying my plate carrier in my car. You just never know when that. Normally, it's in my house. It's staged at my house. It's ready to go because I was always prepared to defend my home. But with what's going on right now, you never know what's going to happen in your vehicle. And I think, I'm not going to get into it, but a really good friend of mine had a situation where they rolled up to Stone Mountain and they got caught in a protest, unbeknownst to them, that all this took place while they were on the road. So they couldn't have known what was happening. Now, if that was myself and my family and my daughter, I would like to know that I have the means to protect myself, because I'm the means of getting them to safety. That's my responsibility. So just always be prepared. So I had to start carrying my plate carrier in my car, and just being able to get up and get in action when needed in 1 minute's notice. And if you have any training or you've at least practiced with it, it's very quick to put a plate carrier on. It's very quick to get your bearings and know what's going on. So yeah, that's what I feel and what my definition of a Minuteman is and what it means to be a Minuteman.
I think that's a very good assessment, a very accurate assessment, and it held true back in 1755, and it holds
right.
true now. Of course, there's been a lot of changes to our country since then, but the concept of the Minuteman, to me, it represents a microcosm of the prepared, right? Not everyone has the foresight or the acuity of thought to go, hey, maybe I should have a rifle handy, a pistol, some medical. But that Minuteman concept can go a lot of different directions. It can go the direction of, hey, all right, maybe someone just doesn't want to own a firearm or something. And we see that in our modern society, because of all of the luxuries and amenities and conveniences that we have at our disposal as a society now, some people generally have a much more passive type of idea of personal safety, because they think, oh, well, the police are always going to be there to protect me, or this person is a designated person that handles my safety, so, I don't have to worry about that. So there are people that maybe just for a lack of ignorance and just not knowing how cruel the world can really be, because, the country that we live in is almost a borderline utopia in terms of how plentiful things are. I mean, and the freedom and exchange of information, how quickly you can just, hop on Amazon and order that one item that you need, and bam, it's there in a day. It's just the convenience level that we have. We associate that convenience with safety as well. Mm-hmm. So we think that, our safety should also be equally convenient, that I can simply pick up the phone and call this person whose job it is, whose designation it is, to come and deal with my problem, right? And the issue is we've created an entire subculture of people who believe that the police are right around the corner. And I believe the concept of the Minutemen can go a lot of different directions. It may not be a combat role. It might be a support role, right? It might be someone who maybe is just medically trained really, really well. And maybe they just have it in their mind that they want to have a go bag with medical gear, and they want to be able to help someone who's hurt in a moment's notice, right? To be that first responder who's sort of mixed in with all the regular populace, right? So that can come in a lot of different forms. It doesn't have to be an armed standing type of thing. It can also be medical preparedness. It can be professional preparedness. It can be someone who is able to render a service in a hurry. Say you're a carpenter and your community, is hit by a disaster, and being able to help people with construction or cleanup. I mean, so there's all these different ways that these Minutemen and women are integrated into our society and are a crucial part of our society. We will get back to the armed portion of it, though. The traditional stance of a Minuteman, I'm going to go all the way back to 1755.
Let's go.
Now, we didn't have a standing army until 1775. So to put this into perspective, I mean, this is 20 years before we had a standing army. Well, oddly enough, these words come from George Washington. George Washington was more than just a founding father. He was a statesman, and he was a very extraordinary individual and a very prepared individual, and he believed very much in dangerous liberty and protecting freedom with the people around you. And to say that he is the father of our country is an understatement. He basically helped our country develop an entire ideology of preparedness, right? So let's go back to some of George Washington's words here.
Right.
And this is when he was the adjutant general of the Virginia militia, all right? It says here, and this is just referring directly from Wikipedia, all right? Upon a frustrating and futile attempt to call up the militia to respond to a frontier Indian attack, these are Washington's words. Mm-hmm. He experienced all the evils of insubordination among the troops, perverseness in the militia, inactivity in the officers, disregard of orders, and reluctance in the civil authorities to render proper support. Gee, what's happening now? Right, that's kind of pertinent now, isn't it?
Right.
And what added to his mortification was that the laws gave him no power to correct these evils, either by enforcing discipline or compelling the indolent and refractory to their duty. The militia system was suited only for times of peace. It provided for calling out men to repel invasion, but the powers granted for effecting it were so limited as to be almost inoperative.
That's crazy that the experience then is the same as it is now.
Yes.
Throughout the hundreds of years that's taken place, it's exactly the same. So that's a great point. And if you circle back to it and say, if he's having those same experiences when he was leading the militia as we are now, what can we do to affect change? What needs to be done? Or if anything needs to be done, does more power need to be given to the militia? I would probably say no. I don't think the militia's role is to be endowed with power. And you can see that when they start calling in an organized militia like the National Guard. The militia is great during peacetime. They really are there to help. They're there to help out in times of, natural disasters. And when they're called to go to war, they do go to war. They fight on the front lines just like the regular army. but I don't think under any circumstances should they be given arrest powers or anything like that during these times. But I do see that I would probably think they're a little bit more organized than they were back in George Washington's time.
Well, I don't know when this particular podcast is going to go live or when you guys are going to be seeing this video if you're watching here on YouTube. But right now we're right in the middle of the Republican National Convention. And of course there's all different types of saber rattling and talks that go on at these things, right? Because these folks are trying to get elected and all. But Trump, passed along plenty of opportunities to mobilize federal troops and/or the National Guard, in many cases, to send troops to help quell some of this violence in these Democrat-controlled areas, where most of all the stuff is happening right now. Okay. Right. And of course, most, if not all, of that support has been turned down. Okay. So it tells you that there's an inside element to all of the stuff that's going on. And we're going to get into some of these elements in a future podcast, but I'll just briefly mention now that a lot of the violence and things that are being committed towards the citizenry in these areas are being, in some cases, perpetuated, if not given the blessing of, by the very government that is claiming to protect the citizens. So what you get there is not only are certain people being targeted because of either political ideology or that they don't support a given political ideology. In this case, BLM is a known Marxist organization.
Yep.
So if you're not a Marxist, you're all of a sudden a political enemy. And essentially in these big cities, they are allowing the enemies of their politics to be targeted in a lot of these things. Now, the media will never talk about that. They'll never mention it. They're not going to, provide any girth to that algorithmically or with any honest reporting. So the idea of reporting and journalism, as we know it, back in the 70s and 80s, journalism was a very, very different thing versus what it is now. We don't have true journalists. We have essentially political officers who are there to toe a certain political line and to drive a certain narrative and to try and convince the people that are tuning into their program of a certain political ideology and not present the information in a way that lets people use their brain and figure out, okay, well, this doesn't make sense or this does. So that's kind of part of the issue, right? So we kind of backtrack. Let's go back to colonial America, and we'll define what the U.S. government considers a militia, okay? So, and this is back in colonial America, all right? It would have been considered all able-bodied men of all ages. That's what it says. All able-bodied men of all ages were members of the militia, depending on the respective states' rules. So, of course, that's when you get into individual towns, states, municipalities having their own little idea. But the general idea is that, you had some form of group of men whose job it was to be able to repel an attack or protect their given town in a state of duress or emergency. Okay, we're going to go on to the Militia Act of 1903. Okay,
Ooh.
This is the term of what a militia is that we live under right now, according to this act. Unorganized militia consists of state militia forces, notably the National Guard and Naval Militia, as you mentioned.
Yep.
The unorganized militia comprising the reserve militia, every able-bodied man of at least 17 and under the 45 years of age that is not a member of the Georgia Guard or Naval Militia. So it still kind of holds true. We're talking every able-bodied person between a certain age, which that consists of a heck of a lot of people.
Right. A ton. And I mean, 17 is still pretty young, but it was very common back in the colonial days to see 13 and 14-year-old kids being put into that militia group. That was a fighting age male during those times. It was very common. You'll see it all the time, like fathers and two sons. And these are like 12-year-old kids running around with muskets. I mean, they might not be the actual ones firing, but they sure helped with a lot of other stuff. And many times they were the ones that were fighting. But it was very common, loading rifles. They were the original creators of the New York carry. Those guys would carry, 4 or 5 muskets, and they would just switch them out. Boom, 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 boom. You'd see a large volume and volley of fire come from that tactic.
A lot of the youngsters were used for, like drumming.
Yeah,
you see the little drummer boys, and you'd also
even
see
younger than that. Yeah, those kids were young,
bearing the colors.
Flag bearers.
Flag bearer, you know, so it wasn't uncommon, maybe not in a combat role, but you're still out there on the battlefield, you know,
still
getting shot
die,
at.
you know, just being out there in general. But, you know, not to get off topic, but if you just think about when you start looking at like the pictures and stuff, like it was almost like a spectacle. You would see people set up on their lawns with like chairs and they're like watching this battle go down, and they're just like, you see someone, you know, taking a picture or drawing, and you see these spectators. It was a spectator sport for some reason. I don't know why, but it's just a different.
Well, there was definitely
time.
a lot of that during the Civil War. You know, I've seen many etchings and paintings and stuff that depict, you know, people, you know, having a picnic
just
and
hanging out,
watching the battle happen.
Like,
I guess,
wow,
you know,
like, it's
very
crazy.
different time, of course.
Oh yeah.
I will make mention, and this is somewhat historical still in terms of just our nation's history, but I took a trip to Savannah, Georgia, not terribly long ago. And there's a lot of really cool things about the way Savannah as a city is organized and set up in terms of the layout of the city. And you notice it's this series of squares everywhere. You know, when you go into a town, right? And you see a town square. It seems like every town has a square. And you think, well, why is it that this is this culmination of where this town sort of, when you think, hey, this is the middle of town, all right, it's the square, right? Well, there's actually a couple of different reasons for that. The reason you have a town square is because that was the area of town that the town's members would pool all the resources, barricade off, and hole up in there and defend the town against an attack.
Right.
Well, Savannah, because James Oglethorpe and, you know, a lot of the early adopters of, you know, basically the people who built Savannah, right? You know, those folks originally were really concerned about attacks and everything. So not only did they have a town square, they had multiple town squares. And each town square had a certain job, a certain task, and all those tasks were delegated to certain squares. Okay, squares 4 and 6, you guys are going to, you know, get all the food together, so we've got good food stores. You guys are going to get the water together. And it was this whole orchestrated movement that if they were attacked, they could draw everyone into the appropriate town squares, and you had a town square that was assigned to you as a citizen. You know which town square to go to.
Like a muster point.
That's right, a muster point. And you would go in there, and you'd have your cannons and your muskets, and you would, you know, defend the city.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't realize that the modern term of a town square was intended for the defense of the town.
That's really cool. I always wondered about that because Charleston, South Carolina is set up very similarly, like around Fort Sumter and all that stuff. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting to know that history.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
yeah. So
as far as Minutemen go, so we touched on, you know, what the original responsibilities were, we really didn't. So the original responsibility was to be that first contact with any invading force. So if you had somebody coming in to invade your land and take your property, at that point in time, it was the British coming in. Your job, your responsibility was to be able to be ready. And I've heard different, I guess, stories. They say one said that the name implies that it should be a minute, but really what I've been told is that it was an hour. So you had to be ready within an hour's time. But the term Minuteman, I guess, was just to convey speed, was to convey the ability to be prepared in a short amount of time. Because I can tell you, even by today's standards, minute is very, very quick. I don't see you being able to get all your gear on and get prepared and do your PCCs and PCIs in a minute to get out there and do it. But I think an hour is a little bit more attainable, especially in that time. But really, to be that first point of contact, to get out there and provide that barrier to the town square, and also to alert others that, you know, this is what's going on. I
would say that it definitely would have been probably more of a moniker than an actual standard that they expected people to be ready in 1 minute. Now, to be fair, a soldier back then, to be combat effective, could essentially grab his musket off the mantle and grab his possibles bag and run out the door, and he's ready.
Right.
So the needs back then to fulfill a combat role were probably considerably different than what now would be, of course. But I think the general idea, yes, is that within a minute's notice,
Right.
and that was, I guess, the term that was thrown around for sure.
Yeah. So if we have the original Minuteman, and we kind of transport that to modern standards and the modern responsibility, so what does it mean now? So it means now now I think we're at a day and age where, there's so much information that you can be ready all the time. Like I stated earlier, we have, we're able to carry our equipment with us in our vehicles. Many of us have 2 sets of equipment, and multiple firearms. So we'll have, weapons in our car, weapons in our home. So we're able to be ready all the time. So how does that help us? That helps us because if we see an accident, it's not only a combat role. So now it's more of just, we're ready for anything. So lots of us carry medical equipment. So be that first responder. If you see, any type of accident, you're able to stop and help and give aid until somebody comes, like the actual first responders, whether it's the fire department or, any type of EMT medical, get there to help out. And also, if you see something occurring that is more of a nefarious, act, by all means, I'm not saying to step in, but you do have a certain level of responsibility that you have to adhere to. That you, as that Minuteman mindset is, no, you're not going to go.
Someone's got to do it.
Somebody has to do it, but you have to be responsible and have to have, I'm not going to say you have to have the training, but it sure helps to have a level of training. But just having that, to not have the cowardice to stand by and watch something happen, but to be able to actually have the intestinal fortitude to take action and help somebody when they're in need.
I think of it like a force multiplier.
Yes.
It's funny that I'm wearing a Mad Dog Mathis shirt.
Nice.
Because that was one of the things that Mathis pushed really hard was being a force multiplier, and also the training of indigenous forces to make them a part of your force multiplication table. But being a force multiplier is a very important thing, okay? No one's saying that you have to replace XYZ, but you can supplement XYZ. And if XYZ is out of commission, well, then now you are your own QRF. You're your own quick reaction force. You're your own little tiny army, and you're going to have to deal with it, right? So I think that living within the microcosm of what the U.S. is and what it means. I mean, think about how many years our army was a frontier army. For years and years and years. It really wasn't even until probably getting out of World War II before we kind of finally got out of the Indian fighting tactics. Mm-hmm. And, we've always been a frontier army. So the way that our disposition as people is we have that very, personal responsibility mindset of, hey, I'm out here and I'm holding the line. It's just me, right? But it doesn't always have to be some, interdiction into a certain situation or something. It can just be, everyday life. I mean, life is kind of a training exercise every single day, right? Our brain, okay, as we go throughout our day and we experience the same things that we did the day before, our brain stores those experiences in a much different way than it does, we learned something today.
Right.
Or, we learned some valuable life skill that made us survive this day that maybe, the last 500 days never challenged us with, but today we learned that. And your brain stores those things in very different ways. That goes in a different filing cabinet. Mm-hmm. Okay, so every day is a training exercise, and life is a giant rolling training exercise. So even if all you do is prepare to be ready for what could happen to you in an everyday situation, then you're already one step ahead of the curve. You're already embracing that survival mindset that human beings have had all the way since the dawn of time. I mean, the fact that humans exist now and weren't ate by wild animals tells you that someone somewhere had to go, you know what, maybe we should sharpen a stick. Maybe I should tie this rock to this stick, and if that animal comes back, I'm going to beat him in the head. And guess what? After I beat him in the head, I'm going to skin him and wear his skin as a warning to his buddies.
Right.
They had to think that at some point.
Right.
You know what I mean? So we have to eventually be men. You can't just sit back and let the world advance into, being barbarians and going back into that concept. I mean, it's okay to live in a modern world with modern amenities and still have the capability to be a barbarian, but just choose not to live like a barbarian. You know what I mean? You still need to be able to, bash a lion over the skull and wear his skin. You know what I mean? You just need to do it in a controlled way and at the right time and when necessary, and make the distinction of when it's necessary and when it's not.
Well, I think that leads to a good segue to the saying is it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So yes, it's okay to utilize the modern amenities that we have, but we still have to take the time to learn how to do it without the amenities. And that is essentially what led us to where we're at now, where you have those that need to be protected and those that are willing to protect. So you have, there's a subset of people, citizens in the U.S. that have delegated that protection to others, and they did so willfully. I have a lot of friends that are not gun people. They've willingly delegated that to somebody else. They know that by delegating that, they put themselves in a position where they're dependent on somebody else to do it for them. And then you have those that are gladly willing to take up that task. And not so much in a police, mindset or a police way, but saying as someone that is more trained or more comfortable with doing this, I'm willing to do that. So I might have neighbors or, other people in my community that are not, willing to do that, whether they're older, they're not capable of doing it themselves. You might have like some seniors. We have those that just don't want to. They're afraid of it for some reason, which is fine. I'm never going to say, well, you should do it yourself. If you're trusting me and delegating that to me, then I will gladly do that. That's just something that I'm comfortable doing, and I have no problem with it.
And I think it's also a mentality and an ideology that people who value their freedom the most accept willingly and readily because they know that one day they might be that person who needs help. So it's important to extend that hand to others that need it, and
right.
to be that person, right? So we'll go back to Thomas Jefferson. I'm going to quote him, and of course you guys have heard this quote before. I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery. So that kind of puts into perfectly into balance what you're talking about. Is our society has become, one of complacency that comes from how peaceful things are and the perception that things are peaceful.
Right.
I believe there's some quote in the Bible somewhere that says something about that there will be war and there will be rumors of war. Okay. So the thing is, it's like, you don't know when that war is going to be at your front doorstep. You don't know when it's going to be outside your vehicle when you're in town getting ice cream with the kids. You don't know where that is. All you know is that the world is a dangerous place and that men are capable of doing those things. It's like Murphy's Law. If it can happen, it will. Nothing ever goes according to plan, right? You can plan to go up to the park and play with your kids and your dog and go get ice cream afterwards and go home and go to bed and everything's hunky-dory. That's the plan. And yeah, those laid plans always, generally, most of the time, 99.9% of the time, are probably going to work out exactly like you wanted. But there's that tiny Murphy's Law that comes into effect. It can be as simple as the tire busted on the truck going home, or you had a mechanical problem, or something happened. So it's always that inconsistency in plans because of the nature of chaos and the nature of those rules, those chaos rules that we kind of live under, right? That there's just certain things that are going to happen, that we have to plan for.
That's a great point, and it reminded me that there was this story on the interwebs, so it has to be true. But in all fairness, it is true. So it showed this restaurant patio, and there was people eating, just minding their own business, eating, and all of a sudden, they get kind of mobbed by this group of protesters.
That was in D.C. a few days ago. Yeah,
and they're just eating. They had nothing to do with it, minding their own business. They went out for a nice dinner, and this is all presumption because I don't know, the dinner could have sucked, but I'm just saying, for all intents and purposes, it was a nice dinner, and they get mobbed. And that just goes to show you, like, you never know. They probably never thought in their head, oh, we're going to go eat dinner with the intention of getting stuck in the middle of this protest and having people shouting at you and throwing stuff and, all in your face and your personal space. And you can see the guy, he's like putting his mask on because these protesters are right there in their face.
Yep.
And that just goes back to, if it can go wrong, it will. Like, they probably planned out that evening, but they didn't plan for that 1% chance of getting mobbed and having to deal with it.
What does Monty Python say? No one expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Right.
Seen that skit? I know you have. It's the same type of thing,
Right.
So, all right, how do you know that you're not just sitting there on the corner having a nice succulent Chinese meal with your family there, just having it out on the town for the evening,
right?
And you're surrounded by a mob of crazy hippies, and then all it takes is for one of those people to throw a punch at you, and that pack mentality takes over, and all of a sudden it becomes a giant fist fight.
Yep.
And they're just, what are you going to do against 30, 40 people that have got you surrounded? All right, I watched the video, okay? Yeah. And you've got this glass, this window that you're in front of, and they've got them surrounded. They can't get away, even if they wanted to get away.
Right.
So all it would take is for one person in that group to turn violent. And all of a sudden...
And it almost did. It
almost did. Yeah. But all it takes is for one person to get truly violent. Violence as an action, and the violence of action, it is contagious. If you're in some situation and someone gets violent, if you are in that pack mentality and you're all kind of on the same side and you all believe the same thing, it's just weird the way human beings are wired. We kind of go, oh, well, it's my turn to punch. And it's the same thing like a pack of dogs going after a kill or whatever. Once that pack mentality takes over, you don't know what people are capable of or what level of violence that they're willing to do. And they may not even be in control at that point. They've gone so far down that primordial, that primitive man, route that they are no longer in control. They haven't had the training, or they don't have the disposition that respects the concept of human life anymore.
Right.
Or respects the concept of law or law and order or what's right and wrong. You're not the person that you were going into that situation once you turn into that pack, right? So that could have turned very violent. Those people could have gotten hurt and or possibly killed by a pack of, angry people who, by the time it was all over, don't even remember why they were mad in the first place.
Right. And then you had the coward next to him that had every ability to kind of help, yet he decided to side with the protesters and with his actions. There's a separate picture of him while they're kind of berating this couple. He's just he's just holding his fist up in solidarity with these protesters in hopes that they don't turn on him. So it really kind of puts that mindset of like, okay, I see them getting attacked. What do I have to do to not have them turn on me? So he basically just holds his hand up with the fist in solidarity with them, and he's like praying that they leave him alone, which is probably the most coward thing that I could ever imagine happening.
There is a very famous photograph, from Nazi Germany. I know you guys have probably seen it, of a rally, and it's a picture of a rally, and all of the Nazis are standing at this rally, and they're all, rendering the Nazi salute or whatever. There's one person in the crowd.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
And he ain't looking nowhere near the camera. He's looking off in the distance. He's not saluting.
Yep.
And you can look at him and almost tell that it's like he realizes, he gets it. Yep. Like he's the penguin that strayed. You can
DTF,
tell
man. He's
that it's
DTF.
not that he just wasn't ready for the photo. He just wasn't having it.
Right.
Right. So that person that was in that crowd was there because if he wasn't, there's no telling what they would do to him. So it's very dangerous that, there are situations where people will go along with certain things, even though they don't agree with it, just in the name of not getting hurt or worse over the situation. And That's a very scary concept, but it's a powerful picture. If you've ever seen it, it kind of makes you think, dang, be that guy, right?
Yep. I first saw that, and you don't really notice it until someone points it out because there's so many hands out. But then once somebody like circles it, you can clearly see that, he's just kind of has a blank look on his face, and he doesn't have his hand out. He's just like, man, I'm not about this.
Before we move on, I do want to recommend a book. It's an excellent book that you guys should check out. It's written by Christopher Browning. It's called Ordinary Men, and it's about the Reserve Police Battalion 101, and it deals with the final solution in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole because I don't want to get into that, but it's a great book because these were people that, before they got drawn up into this police battalion, they were just regular people, carpenters, doing their job, just making a living, and they got pressed into this service. And it's crazy the things that people will do when you put a gun on their hip and put a badge on their uniform and put them in a uniform. The uniform mentality and how it approaches the violence that government can make men do. It's very eye-opening and scary, and it should serve as a warning. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but it's just it's a really interesting book, and it'll kind of make you go, dang.
Well, there was also a university study, and it was actually like an experiment that took place just to kind of test that same mentality, where they took students and they said, okay, these students are their guards and these students are their prisoners.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be like a certain length of time, but it didn't even make it the full length, but just because of the sheer abuse of power that took place. And this was fictional power. It's not real power, but when put into that situation, that uniform and that, faux power will corrupt, and that's basically what you see, and that is exactly why it's so important.
And it did breed real violence and real consequences.
It did, yes.
Even though it was just a study, and even though it was just regular people, again, you got regular people that were put into the standpoint of being, the prisoner, and then random people who were, all right, well, you're in charge. Here you go. Here's your key card. Here's your badge. Here's your nightstick. And then it's just crazy how quick people will enter that pack mentality of, oh, you're not wearing the uniform, so all of a sudden you're below this person. Now, I don't want to go into that, but it is a little bit pertinent to this particular topic because, the whole Minuteman concept, it is almost an ununiformed type of standing up, right? So when you have, these like early volunteers, you go back to 1755 with Washington. It's not like these guys all had matching uniforms. They were all just citizens, right? And I think that puts people on a very different playing field when you come as you are, and you are who you are, and they get to see the person you are. If you show up to muster and you're wearing your patchwork clothes that your wife had to sew together because you're so poor you can't hardly, you had to scrap together every bit of money you could just to afford a good rifle, which back then was a very important tool for a frontiersman.
The most important tool.
You had to have a good rifle, right? Now, you might have holes in your shoes, you might have patchwork clothes, you might have, every manner of other thing that's not well tended to, but your rifle, you better believe, is your livelihood. And when people show up to muster and you get to see people for who they really are, outside of that, it creates, in my opinion, a very, very different environment for soldiering to occur in. Because you wipe away all of the formality and you see people for who they really are, and you can quickly determine who's worth their salt and who's not. Guy shows up to muster and he's the governor's son, and he's got the fancy engraved rifle and clean clothes. Not the first bit of toughness on his hands,
right.
where he's had to work.
Yeah.
No calluses, clean shoes, spit shine. I mean, that guy, he's probably going to have a problem. Right. What I mean? He looks the part. But then that guy who had his rifle passed down from his grandpa 3 generations ago, and you better believe he knows how to use it.
Oh, yeah.
So once that finity is stripped away and people just get down to people being people at large in the world, I think that it did then and it will now speak volumes to what we can expect out of each other and our communities, and the power it will give to each other in terms of empowerment, individual empowerment, to do the right thing within your community and to be a functional asset to your community.
The first time I learned how important a rifle was during the frontier days was when I was a young kid, and we had to read a book called Sign of the Beaver. And I remember their part in the book where this was a young kid. He must have been, I think, maybe 12. And his dad had to go pick up his mom out west and bring her back to the frontier where they claimed their land. So the father left this kid for months because that's how long it took to go to get somebody with a wagon and a horse. And there was just, he was there tending the crops, the farm, gathering food. He was using the rifle, his dad's rifle. He left the rifle there for him to hunt. And this guy comes wandering, like probably normally happened, through the frontier. People were wandering. They're trying to find their land. And he's like, hey, can I stay here for the evening? I'm just, I'm going to stay. I'm going to leave. I just have to make my way. And it was pretty common back then for people to invite guests in for the evening and let them sleep and feed them, and then they go on their way. Well, this guy stole the kid's rifle when he left in the morning. And this kid, when you're reading the book, you could hear the devastation and the fear because he knew he was dead. Like there was no way for him to hunt and gather meat and get anything. And that's where the book kind of goes as far as him meeting the Native American tribe to help teach him how to do these things. But and that just ties into like that rifle being the means of your existence during that time. And yes, we have currently a lot of different ways that we can get meat, but that goes back to being the warrior in the garden. You should be able to have the skill set to go and get it, and not necessarily have to do it all the time, but you should still be able to do it.
I think we are going to segue into the modern Minuteman a little bit, and I'll kind of, we'll wrap up this podcast by going over some of those concepts, but I will just make quick mention that, when we look at the way things were way back then versus now, is people were investing a lot more time and effort to survive back then than they do now.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So when survival doesn't become the mainstay focus of everyday life, you pursue other things. All right. So that's when you start getting into the pursuit of, arts, right? You start pursuing philosophy and art and different ways of thinking and, different languages and different writing styles. And, let's write a book. Let's do this. So it becomes a survival of mankind's intellect more than mankind's physical survival. So we've gotten more away from the physical day-to-day survival instinct to the survival of mankind's intellect and pursuits. And both those things are important. I believe that every man, woman, and child should embrace both those things equally and build a sharp mind and a strong back and a strong will based on those things. However, our society now has looked at those intellectual pursuits so heavily that they've almost forgotten what it means to really, truly survive and live in the world at large.
Yes.
So I think that perfectly kind of ties in what you're saying there.
That and what you just said is there are those that wish to pursue the intellectual side of life, philosophy, physics. I told my wife when we first met, I am not a smart man, but I'm a hard worker and I will protect our family relentlessly. And I think that those that choose to pursue the intellectual side, what you're seeing is that just because they feel that there's no longer a need to be a warrior and be able to protect, that they're assuming that they don't need it. In all actuality, you need that. You have to have that side, and they can live homogeneously. They can live together. Just understand the roles of, hey, this is what we do, and this is what you do. We will never say, hey, stop learning and stop going after the intellectual. It's worthless.
That's right.
You don't need it. But yet you're going to turn around and tell me that I don't need it. I don't need these things. I don't need, all of these things that we have a right to have. So let's just live together. Let us do what we do and protect you, and you do what you do and learn and share your wealth of knowledge with everybody. It's I don't see what the problem is.
And there are many situations where a lot of those roles are reversed and put into very different environments and with people doing their thing. That's completely understandable. I do want to segue into really what the main talking point of the video or the video and podcast was going to be
video.
all along is that we want to talk about, okay, well, what is a modern Minuteman? So we've already talked about, historically what makes up a Minuteman, and we've talked a little bit about the importance of why we approach that altar now, right? So what does it mean to approach that altar? Now, I would say in terms of combat effectiveness and just being ready to deal with any situation, there are some very important goals that I feel people need to settle in on and make sure that they can adhere to. I actually put out a challenge today on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and I posted a video where I said, all right, set an egg timer for 1 minute, and can you, in 1 minute, grab your rifle, support gear, and food and water and enough supplies to disappear for 72 hours and come out smelling like a rose? And the responses I got were pretty interesting. Some people were saying, hey, it took me 3 minutes to get my gear together. Okay, 3 minutes. Okay, you get a pass. Okay.
Right.
The point is, you can't do it in a minute. We get that. But there are some people that are like, man, I grabbed my stuff and I ran out the door and I was able to come in and turn off the egg timer and I had 15 seconds to spare.
Jeez.
Now that's ready.
That is ready.
That's ready. Okay. So what does it mean to be ready? I mean, now versus back then, I think the needs are very different. I think that every citizen needs to have a good functioning rifle. And I would venture to say an AR-15 is definitely a good choice. A good AR.
The gold standard.
A gold standard. Yeah. I'd say a good AR with at least a good solid red dot, and put a sling on the rifle. You need a sling on your rifle. Make sure you have a sling and at least a decent optic or something. I prefer red dot for a variety of different shooting styles. I as well do. And I would say 8 magazines and 1 in the gun at a minimum. With whatever ammunition you choose to run. If you can afford it, I mean the federal bonded FBI load is great. It's like $1.80 a shot. It's not cheap, but if it's your go-to setup, that bonded FBI load, it's a 62 grain load. So if you're shooting 62 grain ball, that will perfectly work with your existing 0 for 62 grain ammo. But the FBI bonded load is absolutely great. It expands really good, and it is absolutely devastating. So I would recommend that load for sure. But at its core, a rifle is definitely important, and AR-15 I would suggest. For your support gear, you can go with a couple of different concepts. We've already talked about this, Matt and I have,
right,
in a couple of previous videos about like the whole war belt idea versus maybe a carrier. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach that. But if you are adamant about carrying a sidearm, a war belt is a great idea because you've already got your sidearm on there, a couple of pistol mags, maybe a pair of AR mags, and on your war belt you can set up some medical, a couple of tourniquets, maybe some EMT shears, and a multi-tool. All right, that and a camel back full of water, and a 3-day pack with maybe some socks, and a change of clothes, and maybe some food, enough for 3 days. That probably gets you pretty close.
Yeah, and I think what you'll see is those that are able to get their gear in that fast of a time do have everything kind of pre-staged. So they do have a war belt. Everything is staged on the belt. It's significantly faster and easier to just grab and go. So you might have your plate carrier with your mags already on it. I prefer 6 mags and 1 in the gun. It's just a little bit lighter. I mean, granted, yes, when we were overseas, we carried a ton because you're outside the base and you don't have access to it. We're not operators. We don't have airdrops coming in. So we carry what we have, and we have whatever else in the vehicle. So we were carrying a ton of ammo. Here, I don't foresee that being an extended, firefight. It might, 6 mags, one in the gun.
I'd say a breaking contact would be more of a appropriate response to a situation if you do need to deploy a rifle in a defensive situation or God forbid, an offensive situation, your mission is definitely going to be to break contact and create distance and escape the problem more than engaging in the problem.
If it takes me more than 7 mags to find the solution, I'm in a bad way.
Yes.
I mean, I put myself in a position where, I'm in a very, very bad way. So
well, that's why I like the battle belt idea, because you got, one magazine in the rifle, 2 spare magazines. That's probably going to get you where you need to go initially. You could always have some spare magazines in your 3-day pack. So if you drop your other mags while you're out doing whatever is happening, you can just plus those up.
Yep.
Your general skirmish, I would imagine that's probably going to, create the distance you need to get away or deal with the situation. Now, some people may choose to go like the full, like a Black Hawk Rhodesian rig. I like the old school Black Hawk chest rigs that don't have the armor in them. They're just nice and lightweight.
Right.
And I like the old FAL rigs too.
Well, I think
just have 4 mags.
That one has
great.
a small space for a small piece of armor on it. I mean, it's not a 10 by 12 or anything like that, but it's enough to kind of
you can put a 6-inch plate.
Yeah,
if you want
a little chicken plate.
I like the Rhodesian rigs. They're nice. But no matter what equipment you decide to use, remember, when you are arming yourself with a rifle, you've got to be able to support the rifle. That's why we call it support gear. So you've got to be able to have extra magazines. So it's just one of those things to consider. No matter what your level of preparation is or what your budget is for what you can afford to do, just work within your budget. And do a little bit at a time, and don't think you have to spend a bunch of money. You can buy those Rhodesian rigs used. You want to get the ones from the 90s, the old ones.
The OG ones.
Yes. You can buy the used Rhodesian rigs for like $100. Like, there's no reason to not have one. They're like $100.
Great chest rigs, too. And guys, you can get some great plate carriers for $150, and you don't feel like you have to run plates when you buy it. You can get soft armor to supplement that to start out with,
or no armor.
But you can get great soft armor, inserts for a very, very reasonable cost. It'll stop most handgun rounds. We're not talking like 5.7. Hopefully you don't get hit with some 5.7, but, there's just a lot of options. Don't feel like you have to go and drop 10 grand because you saw somebody on IG flexing with the Ops Core helmet with, night vision PVS 14s and just like a $10,000 setup, guys. Those are far and few between. No matter how many you see on Instagram, they're not plentiful. You don't see just tons of them.
Oh, the military owns the night. We borrow it.
Yep. And trust me, there'll be plenty on the ground for you to pick up. So
oh boy,
don't worry about it.
So I will mention too on gear, what I would suggest is going on somewhere like eBay, and you can find great deals on used London Bridge Trading, also Tactical Tailor and Black Hawk. Especially the older Tactical Tailor stuff is great.
Yep.
And the older London Bridge Trading stuff is excellent gear. It will last you a lifetime. It is good gear. And you'll save like 40% off what you would buy it new. So don't be afraid to buy used gear.
Yep.
You can save a ton of money on support gear by picking up used stuff on eBay. That's what I do. I buy all my stuff used on eBay. And man, your local surplus shop. Okay, so like my one Rhodesian rig that I set up, I paid $80 for the carrier. I paid $5 a piece for the pouches, the magazine pouches at my local surplus store.
Nice.
Just used Marine Corps turn-in Molly pouches. Didn't got to be nothing fancy. My 2 medical pouches, they were like $5 at the local Army Navy store. And then my multi-tool pouch and my pistol mag pouch, like $5. I literally have no more than maybe $150 in the carrier total. And of course, adding your mags and equipment. But you don't have to spend a lot of money to support your firearm in the field. You've got to be able to take the gun into the fight and support the gun and yourself in the fight. And it doesn't take a lot of extra effort to do that. And I feel that part of being that Minuteman is being able to respond to a fight in a hurry, quickly, and to support yourself, your stuff in the immediate 72-hour future. If you can do it in a 72-hour window, you're probably going to come out okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you nailed it. You don't have to go and drop a ton of money. Surplus items work great. I think a lot of people get caught up in the Gucci gang type thing where you have to go out and get the highest name brand and Yeah, you can go and drop $800 on a jumpable plate carrier. Guys, you will never see the inside of a C-130. There is absolutely no reason for you to have a jumpable plate carrier if you don't have to. Don't spend $400 on it. You can go and get a great plate carrier that's non-jumpable because, again, nobody here is jumping out of a plane. And it's going to work. It's going to stop a bullet. As long as you put the plates in there, you're good.
Yep. So there's lots of different ways to approach it. Just understand that there are some basic categories you need to concentrate on. Is your primary rifle. I would say at least a decent pistol as a backup. And if you're going to have your support gear, medical is a huge component of it. I'll just end by saying that, and we are getting close to being towards the end of our podcast here, so thanks for tuning in. But I will mention medical is super important. You have a much higher chance of needing to save someone's life than you do need to plug a hole in to shoot someone, right? That's just the reality of the situation. The chances of you needing to medically respond to something far outweigh the chances that you're going to actually have to get into some sustained crazy gunfight and, like you see in the movies. It's not like that. And the thing is, think about it. All right. If you remove the element of a gunfight from a situation, there are thousands of ways to get hurt, right? You look at all the protests going on. People are getting ran over with vehicles. People are getting rocks thrown at them, broken glass. Things are exploding. You've got concussions, abrasions, cuts, burns, all different ways that you can get hurt, right? And none of it involved firearm, right? So there's lots of ways to get hurt. So the chances of needing to save someone who's badly hurt are going to far outweigh that. So part of being that Minuteman, we have to face the unfortunate reality that we may have to take a life, but 90% of that is saving a life. And even the taking of a life is done in the name of saving lives. So see, at the end of the day, it's all about trying to save lives.
Right.
And that's the reality you have to look at it from. And it may not be a romanticized reality that people, think that they're getting into it for or the reason they're doing it. But the reality is that's what you're going to deal with.
Right. And, a lot of people forget that, that's a great point. When you put holes in somebody, even in a self-defensive situation, you're not just going to sit there and watch the guy bleed out in front of you. I mean, that's the thing people forget. They think they're just going to hit the guy 2 or 3 times and they're just going to call the police and just literally watch the guy bleed out in front of them. No, you're going to render aid.
It's your duty to stop bleeding, whether you cause it or not.
Exactly. I mean, it's still your responsibility. So, you put holes in the guy, plug the holes. I mean, yes, he's going to, call the police, secure the scene, secure your weapon, make sure everything's good, but you still should render aid and make sure that everything is good.
Yep. So there's a lot of that goes into it. Well, guys, we really hope that you enjoyed this podcast. And if you're watching here on YouTube, we hope you enjoyed the video. I don't know when the video is going to go up in regards to the podcast, but if you're tuned in on YouTube here, definitely go check out the Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit podcast. We post every Friday. We hope you enjoy this format and you like it. We don't always post the podcast over on YouTube. So if you want to get every podcast, if you like this format, you have to follow us on Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit.
That's right.
That's Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts.
Yep.
Where else?
Pretty much everywhere that you can find podcasts, we're there.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Make sure you go over to Ballistic Ink and pick yourself up a snazzy t-shirt, and that definitely supports our effort. And if you're listening in, definitely thank you guys for tuning into the podcast. Leave us a great review. We would really appreciate that. Leave us a 5-star review. That helps get us pushed up in the search results. I think now we're getting on up there in terms of how well the podcast is doing.
Support has been absolutely amazing. You guys have been great with your feedback, and we always tell you guys if you have any questions or concerns, shoot us an email, info@ballisticink.com. If you guys want to hear something specific, we're happy to see if that's something we can put on the schedule to talk about, and we'll get it done.
All right. Guys, thanks so much. Remember, live free, be happy. It's all going to be okay. Have a good one. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Life, Liberty, and Pursuit. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else podcasts are found. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd really appreciate that. You can support us over on Ballistic Ink by picking yourself up some merch. And remember, guys, danger is freedom. Have a good one.